All right, everyone. What's up? It's Dennis here. No doctor today. Apparently, we ate an apple or something. Not here. So basically, this is just gonna be sort of my recap of the season, and I guess going deeper into my opinion than 280 characters can. Full disclosure, I'm cooking dinner right now, so if there's background noises at some point, sorry, but tough shit. So got a lot of pushback basically for my take when I said like this team didn't accomplish everything or didn't accomplish anything, and people disagreeing with that. And I don't know. Maybe it's a difference in what you call success and what you don't. I firmly believe success is relative to expectations. Like, it's, I guess, somewhat of a bad example because Kansas beat Samford, but like, I think Samford pretty clearly had the more successful season when compared to Kansas, even though Kansas is the better team. Kansas was an 8-point favorite. They beat them head to head. I don't think that's super debatable. Like, Kansas and Samford are on different levels. And why this matters to me with Creighton is this wasn't your standard Creighton team. And there's going to be a lot of comparisons among Creighton teams. There's also going to be some comparisons to Wisconsin just because that's the team I grew up rooting for, so sorry. But the 21-22 season, for example, in my eyes, is an absolute success. I don't think that team was very good. The analytics supported it back. It was a borderline top 50 team. You beat Villanova at home. You swept UConn. You made the Big East title game. You won a tournament game. I think that is the absolute max that group of players could have achieved in that year. So when you compare it to this year, this year, objectively on a purely head-to-head basis, this year's team was better. This year's team did more. I think actually it's a little closer than you'd think. I don't have that team's conference record off the top of my head. They probably were right around 14-6. Give me 1 second. This year's team was 14-6 in conference. They were 25-10 overall. The 22 team went 23-12 overall, 12-7 in conference. So this year's team did slightly better in conference, went 2 rounds further, won 2 less Big East tournament games. So, and analytically graded out much higher. So I'd say this year's team was better, achieved more. But the expectations on this year's team compared to that team are nowhere similar. If you told any Creighton fan they're going to make the tournament that year, they would have taken it. I mean, that's a team that was down 9 at halftime to Arkansas Pine Bluff in their first game. And so when people call this season a success, to me, I just don't get it. Because, what did you achieve? And I get the UConn win, and we'll go deeper into that in a minute here. I get the Sweet 16, which, whatever, fine. We disagree on what a big deal that is. But if you asked anyone around the program what their goals were for this season, they would have told you 3 things. They want to win a Big East title, and they want to make the Final Four. They want to get the round further than last year. And by no means, I doubt even they expected, by no means did I expect you sweep the Big East regular season, you sweep the Big East tournament, you make a Final Four. Like, that was never happening. So I'm not asking for that, but, those were 3 goals that the team set for themselves, told you those were their goals. The coaching staff would have said those were their goals. Like, the media would have said those were their goals. They didn't do any of that. And I fully understand UConn turning into the fucking buzzsaw that they are. Couldn't have really been foreseen. I know I had them picked 5th. I didn't think they'd be that good. I was clearly wrong on that. But and that's one thing. But you went 14-6 in conference, 2 home losses, and I'll give you some slack for the Butler loss, but the Villanova loss was pretty inexcusable. You kind of got ran off the floor by St. John's. Marquette played. You absolutely should have beat Marquette on the road. Marquette played terrible, and you didn't beat them. And you lost the conference by 4 games at the end of the day. So what separated you from the best team in the conference, again, is a great team and really couldn't have been predicted, was 4 games. That's a massive difference. And if it's 2, maybe I can get there 2-3, and you can say, like, okay, UConn was a buzzsaw. What are you going to do? I can kind of get there. But, like, you shouldn't have lost at Providence. That's a Providence team that was down a preseason first-team all-conference player. You shouldn't have lost at home to Villanova. And in a vacuum, you shouldn't have lost to Butler. Now, again, you can say Butler played great. You can put some on Creighton for the shots they made, whatever. But then in the Big East tournament, you have a first-round loss to a team. Again, you should not lose to that team. That Providence team is fine. And, again, Devin Carter, very good player. You didn't anticipate the season he had, but, like, that's a team that's down a first-team all-conference player. And a team that, even if they have him, I think you're still better than that. So to lose that game, I think, is pretty disappointing in context of other things. But then you get to the tournament, and, that's the shot. It all goes away. Look at NC State. Their coach is going to be fired. They made a Final Four. You tell any NC State fan before the season they're going to take this. They'd take it. And you gave any fan base, with the exception of, I don't know, maybe 5 preseason, the option to take NC State's path this year, and they would take it. So going to the tournament, you beat Akron, 14 seed, whatever, fine. Did what you're supposed to do, not going to get too deep into it. And you beat an 11 seed Oregon team, second. That, I think that Oregon team's solid. Like, Dante's very good. Kusnard was playing very well, but, like, that's probably a top, 40-ish team, give or take. So, again, good win. And, the Oregon's who you played. I'm not going to say, you beat a bad team to get to the Sweet 16. That's not your fault. But I'm not going to give you, I'm not going to throw you a parade for beating that Oregon team. So then you get to this Tennessee team, and I think this Tennessee team's very good. I think they're a top 8 team, and you lose to them. And there's no shame losing to them in a vacuum. If other things went differently and you lose that Tennessee game, yeah, it sucks. I don't think Tennessee played their A game, and I think we played well outside of 5 minutes. And so, again, obviously it sucks to lose that game, but you lost it, whatever. Where it becomes a letdown is just in the context of other things. And I know, so let's address the UConn win. You beat number 1 overall. That's outstanding. That's great. No real, that's a great win. My 2 counters to that are, A, UConn being number 1 is something UConn did. That achievement is built entirely off the backs of UConn's season. UConn played a close game at Butler. If they drop that game, they're not number 1. Does the win, and no one cares as much about that win now. If you beat 3rd-ranked UConn as opposed to 1st-ranked UConn, it's significantly less deal. And again, it's a big deal. That UConn team's great. Beating them, especially in the way you did, was extremely impressive, and it showed what this team could do. But then on the flip side of it, again, it sort of shows you, what this team could do. This team's A game, if this team plays their A game, they beat Tennessee by 15. And that A game was, quite literally the A-plus game. But, if this team plays their A-minus game, if Trey has a okay game instead of a objectively awful game, you win that game. And so that's where, to me, when I say they accomplished nothing, if you had this team write their goals down at the start of the season, you said, what are your goals? No one's goals said second, lose the Big East by four games, finish second, Big East quarterfinals, lost Sweet 16. That, I guarantee you, no one's goals said that or anything close to it. So, by their own words, then, how do you consider it a success? I guess is what I'm coming from. And to bring it back to that 21-22 team, if you ask that team their goals, it probably was finish top 5 in the Big East, make the tournament. and they achieved those goals. So I'm gonna say congrats to them. Like, but when you have this year's team that if you asked them their goals, they didn't do any of it. So how do we say it's a success? And I know we say like, oh, we came from the Valley 10 years ago. Like, look where we're from. We haven't had success. Like, guys, that's a long fucking time ago. Like, UConn, we'll get to Houston next. And I know UConn had history. I got into this debate with someone, whatever. UConn finished 15-17 6 years ago. And look at them now. And to go to Houston, so Creighton came to the Valley in, 13 technically in Ken Palm years? Give me one sec. Okay, so Creighton's first Big East season was the 2014 season. And if you want to go way, way back, I understand Houston does have some history, like in the 80s and the 90s. But in the 2014 season, Houston went 17-16 in the American Conference and 8-10 this year. Or 8-10 in conference. They then fired their coach, hired Kelvin Sampson. They were not a top 100 team in that 2014 season. Since then, they have finished top 2 in Ken Palm 3 times, another top 5 finish. They won the Big 12 by, I think, multiple games. They won it outright. They've gotten multiple number 1 seeds. They've made a Final Four. They've gotten screwed by injury luck. Like, I'm sure somebody's going to be like, oh, you're going to use Houston as tournament success. Like, Houston's best player's been out 2 of the last 3 years. Like, fuck you. That's not a fair comparison. But, like, don't give me the 10 years ago you were in the Valley type of shit. Like, 11 years ago, Houston was in Conference USA, and 10 years ago they were in the American, not fielding a sub-100 team, and had just fired their coach. Like, it's fucking doable. That's not a place outside of Clyde Drexler in the 80s that has a history of winning. Okay? Prior to that, in the Ken Palm era, prior to Kelvin Sampson's hire, and prior to 2018 when they did make the tournament, they'd made the tournament once in the Ken Palm era. So don't give me like, oh, Houston actually did have a lot of history. Like, no, they fucking didn't. So to say like, oh, 10 years ago we were in the Valley, that's not a fucking excuse, okay? Like, 10 years is a long goddamn time, especially in the transfer portal era. Like, you don't get that shit, okay? Well, if it's that hard, Houston went the time. And that's not to put down the steps we've made as a program. I fully recognize that. I'm well aware that the program today is infinitely better than where it was 10, 15 years ago, and even 5, 6 years ago. But I'm just sick of saying like, oh, we hadn't made a Sweet 16 in the 21st century, so like making one this year should be considered an accomplishment. Like, no, not really, actually. And so, again, just to relate it to last year, like I tweeted that this loss, when you look back 15, 20 years, the loss to Tennessee isn't the one that's going to bother you. It always will be the San Diego State loss, because you had a absolutely gift-wrapped run. And let's address the Elite Eight last year, because I know I vary on this. It does matter who you play. And I know this is going to sound like I'm just making this point to make this point because it just so happens to support my argument. But like the argument to me where who you played doesn't matter, that cutoff is the Final Four. If you make a Final Four, I don't give a shit if you somehow played 4 16 seeds. Okay? So, funny enough, actually, Houston, good example. Houston in the 21-22 season, they made the Final Four, if I recall, by beating 15 Cleveland State, I think 10 seed Rutgers, 11 seed Syracuse, and 12 seed Oregon State. Like, by all means, a fucking ridiculously easy Final Four path. But they made a Final Four. I will always defend that, like, as saying, like, they made the Final Four. They played 4 teams in front of them. Like, Creighton, your Elite Eight, or your Sweet 16 game, you beat a 15 seed. Like, I'm not going to fucking throw you a parade for beating an Ivy team that was borderline top 100 the entire year, and again, a fucking 15 seed. Like, that's it's not your fault. That's who you played, but then you didn't do it. You had a 5 seed and a really not great 5 seed. Like, they were fine. You had a 5 seed going to the Elite Eight, and you played like shit and you lost. Like, that's the matter. Watch that game. Like, Creighton should beat that team by 10. So, and again, you look at last year, like, they lost double-digit games. People are going to get upset with this. The semifinal effort against Xavier in the Big East tournament was downright pathetic. Like, they would have saved everyone time if they just said, we're not going to play basketball today. That might be harsh. Go watch that game. There is zero effort. It was really, really bad. And then they beat the Elite Eight. So and they beat a bad NC State team, a solid Baylor team, and a 15 seed. So I'm not going to take away that run necessarily. But he's like, oh, we made an Elite Eight. You didn't beat some elite team. If this team had made the Elite Eight and last year's team had made the Elite Eight, this year's Elite Eight by far is a more significant run and a more impressive run. And that's my point is, you didn't have that signature. When Creighton beat Princeton in the Sweet 16, it wasn't like a nation takes notice of your school like it would have been yesterday. Yesterday's win would have solidified you as this has been a really good program, national stage the last 2 years. They beat a really good Tennessee team. They beat a really good player in Dalton Connect. That didn't happen last year, and that didn't happen 2 nights ago, obviously. And as I've just gotten an argument now saying that they didn't do anything notable, it's not nationally notable. No one is going to say next year, oh, that Creighton team made a Sweet 16. I'm not going to 15 years from now, if I have kids, which I kind of hope I don't. If I have kids, I'm not going to tell them, you guys had to fucking be there for Creighton's Sweet 16 run that year. Now, you compare that to Wisconsin. So, I think Wisconsin, largely for most of their tenures, I think Wisconsin and Creighton are pretty similar programs. If you want to look back 10, 12 years. And Wisconsin probably had a little more overall success for a while. The tournament success was bad, but the only reason I don't talk about that 2014 team is because of what the 2015 team then did, which you could draw some parallels between to give some context. The 2014 Wisconsin team got a 2 seed, made the Final Four. 2015 team got a 1 seed, beat undefeated Kentucky, lost in the championship to Duke, 8-5. Not the point, but I guess I saw the parallels of the Wisconsin team made the Final Four, lost in heartbreaking fashion to Kentucky. Everyone came back, we're avenging this. Our goal is to make the championship game, win it. And they did that. They won the Big Ten. They made the championship game and lost it, unfortunately. But, that's what it looks like when you set those high expectations for yourself. And that's not... If Wisconsin doesn't win the title game this year... I don't sit there and say, oh, this is a failure. When Wisconsin won the Big Ten, funny enough, in 21-22 with Johnny Davis, I didn't sit there saying, oh, well, they made the title game 8 years ago, so actually this is a failure. No, that team wasn't that good. The fact they won the Big Ten that year and they still lost in a disappointing way in the tournament, this is a tangent, but I'll come back around. So Wisconsin then, that team, if you remember, they lost to 11 seed Iowa State in the round of 32 in Milwaukee. That tournament, that's fucking disgusting. You lost that game. That Iowa State team sucked. But it's still a success because you won the Big Ten. You won something, and that's for the people who say tournament March is random. Yeah, I understand that, but you need something to go with it. In no other aspect, if I'm say I'm a competitive distance runner or something, I'm gonna set out today and run a 6:30 mile. That's a lofty goal. I think I'm not super fast. But if I say I'm going to run a 6:30 mile and I run a 6:45 mile, I'm not going to be oh, that was a success. That's not how that works. If you set a goal and you don't hit it, you failed. That's what goals mean. Otherwise, just fucking play touch stick, I guess. I don't know. That's what I don't get. But to bring back to Wisconsin, 2014 Wisconsin, I will tell everyone how awesome that 2014 tournament run was. Beat 15 America in the first round, had an awesome game, funny enough, against Oregon in the second round. Crushed Baylor. Funny enough, that Baylor team was the one who beat the Doug Creighton team. And then had a fucking classic with Arizona in the Elite Eight. I'll tell people about that. I'm going to say, that was fucking awesome. And in Wisconsin circles, you say, you compare to the 2015 team, but you say, maybe this team could be 2014 Wisconsin. If Creighton has a top 15 team 10 years from now, no one's going to be oh, maybe this team can be the 23-24 Creighton team. They fade. This team will fade over time. Maybe not the group itself and what they've done. Kalkbrenner will go in the rafters. You'll remember Shireman was awesome. You'll remember Alexander was awesome. But, you won't remember the 23-24 Creighton Blue Jays 10 to 15 years from now. It's not a team, and if you have, it means something went wrong. And you will always remember those two Wisconsin teams. Like, I will never forget them as long as I live. Those are my two favorite teams I've ever watched. And they won. The 14 team, I think, lost the regular season Big Ten, won the Big Ten tournament title, and then made the Final Four. And 15, I'm pretty sure, won the regular season. I think actually lost the Big Ten title game and then made the championship game. So, yeah, they won stuff. Like, I'm not saying they had to win a title, and that 15 Wisconsin team was much better than this Creighton team. I'm not giving a one-to-one comparison. But, like, it's not... You have to win something. Like, and I don't give a shit that we're going to embroider 2024 on our Sweet 16 banner. The only programs with Sweet 16 banners are the ones who don't have enough Final Four banners. Like, Kansas not going to celebrate making a Sweet 16. Duke will not celebrate that they made a Sweet 16 and Elite 8 this year. Like, and again, I'm not saying we're Kansas or Duke or we need to be, but, like, there's some truth to that. And so, I guess that's kind of my argument on why I don't think it was a success. It was a very good team. It's depending on what Alabama does in the Final Four game, it may or may not go down as the highest-ranked team in Creighton history. So that's absolutely something to remember. But, like, in terms of notable achievements that, like, nationwide people are going to take note of, there's none. And I don't entirely see the argument against it. To give the 10-minute cliff notes, if you asked any player, any fan, any coach to write down their goals, it would have been win the Big East, make a Final Four. None of that happened. And no other aspect of life can you write a goal, not reach it, and say it was a success. Again, if I say, I'm a distance runner, I want to run a 6:30 mile, I run in 6:45, that was a failure. So now, to kind of the other half, and this won't be as long, or maybe it will, I don't know. But I said, like, it might not be this good again, and people got on me for that. And, I mean, time's going to go on for a while, so it probably will be this good again. But, like, everyone's like, oh, we have a great recruiting class coming in. Like, that doesn't really mean that much. I mean, shit, look at Kentucky. Like, and I know we're going to bring in transfers. But, like, you hit in this past recruiting class, like, Ryan Kalkbrenner was a 100th percentile outcome. Like, if you ask Greg, like, what is the best case scenario, he doesn't say 3-time Big East Defensive Player of the Year. Like, if you ask anyone on the coaching staff, like, everything clicks for this kid, what happens? No one says he's as good as he was. Baylor Shinerman, like, great player. You knew you were getting a big transfer. You didn't know you were getting the guy who might win Big East Player of the Year. Like, that, again, is a 98th percentile outcome. Trey Alexander, like, good 4-star recruit, 90th percentile outcome. Like, you hit... and Nemhard to a point, 90th percentile outcome, and I know the transfer, you stacked multiple hits in a row. And so, to compare to Wisconsin, like those 14, 15 teams, like Sam Decker, 5-star recruit, turned into a first-star draft pick, 99th percentile outcome. Frank Kaminsky, 3-star, turned into Naismith Player of the Year, 100th percentile outcome. It's like, you look at what Wisconsin did when... and I'm going to call it luck. People are going to get mad and say, like, oh, they recruited those guys. Like, guys, that is lucky. Like, you never recruit a player thinking he's going to be a 3-time Defensive Player of the Year. That doesn't happen. You can get the number one. Like, people are recruiting Cooper Flagg. If Cooper Flagg's a 2-time All-American, and kind of a bad analogy because he's probably going to be one and done, but, like, that's still, like, you don't expect that to happen. And so when Wisconsin's luck broke their way, they won multiple Big Ten titles, and they made multiple Final Fours. Creighton has, what is their version of that? A Sweet 16? 2 Sweet 16s, and an Elite 8 in which they beat a 15 seed. Only the third time ever a 15 seed had made the Elite 8, or made the Sweet 16. And again, not their fault, that's who they played, but, like, that context is essential in the achievement. So, when you say... like, oh, they have a great recruiting class coming. Like, yeah, they do. And, like, I think McAndrew's going to be good. But, like, recruiting is a lot like Major League Baseball prospects. Like, sometimes you just miss. Like, Jackson McAndrew could be a 4-year starter. He could also be a guy who looks like shit next year in down transfers. Like, that's... If Jackson McAndrew is not a Power 6 player in down transfers, that's a perfectly reasonable outcome. Like, that's not something that should shock anyone. And it shouldn't shock anyone with the exception of maybe 3 to 5 guys in a given year. That's not a knock on him. I mean, you have multiple guys every year that are just whiffs. Like, I can name multiple. To go back to Wisconsin, 2008, they recruit 5-star center Ethan Anderson. I don't think he played a meaningful minute for them his entire career. So that happens. Like, you can't just say, because the last time we had a good recruiting class, they all hit, these guys are going to hit. It doesn't work like that. And you can't just assume you're ever going to be back again. Like, do you think 4 years ago, Louisville was ranked number 1 in the country? Do you think they thought they'd be here right now? Like, absolutely fucking not. When the Oklahoma City Thunder lost the finals with young Westbrook, young KD, young Harden, I guarantee you every Thunder fan said, like, yeah, it sucks, but, like, we'll be back in a couple years. They never made the finals again. I mean, shit, look at the Eagles. Like, Eagles lose the Super Bowl. You got Hurts on a controllable contract. You got Devonta Smith, and they're like, yeah, like, we're going to be fine. Like, look what the fuck happened there. They fired all their coordinators and were the worst team in football the last month and a half. So, and I think the program's in a better place than it was 4 to 5 years. Like, if you asked me, are they going to make the Sweet 16 again in the next 3 or so years? I'd probably say, yeah. Are they going to, like, might they get a Big East title in some form or another in the next 5 to 7 years? Like, maybe they'll crack a Final Four. Like, I'd probably take the yeah on that side. But, like, you can't just say, like, oh, we have a good recruiting class. The program's turned it up. We'll be back. Like, it doesn't work like that. Like, shit happens. Look at Ohio State, how quickly that went off the rails with Holtman. 3 years ago, they were a 2 seed, and it just won the Big Ten. Now he's fired, and they had to settle on their interim. Right? Like, it doesn't always work like that. So I caution anyone saying, like, yeah, it's fine, we'll be back, shrug it off. Like, this was a really good team. This might be the best team in history, in Creighton history. Like, it's not automatic that this next class or the class after that is just going to come in and top it. And so when you do have those opportunities, you have to take advantage of them. And for the reasons I've outlined, I don't really think this team did. Great team, a lot of great memories. Enjoyed it for the most part, a lot of fun wins. But I don't know how you can say the last 2 years they achieved what they should have. And I guess that's kind of where I'm coming from. So, yeah, a little long-winded, and I don't know, hopefully this does better than 280 characters did. So, see you guys later.